cover mostly for the in chef, how do you write a cookbook. So before starting writing a cookbook, you should be knowing about how the chef setup works. So in a standard setup, a chef infrastructure would have a server. So chef server is where all your configurations would be deployed. So whatever configurations you want to apply to your servers, all those configurations you need to deploy into the chef server. And all the clients in your infrastructure where you want to change or where you want to deploy all these configuration changes. So all these clients are basically Linux servers. So all these Linux servers will connect to this chef server, and then they will pull the respective configurations, and then that will get applied to those servers. So starting with, let's say we have a chef server that is already set up, and then the other component would be workstation. So in Chef, workstation is basically a place where you develop all of your chef related code. So chef related code is in writing the cookbooks, recipes, and uh, uh, and whatever other components like roles, environments. So uh, whatever things or whatever code you want to write for your chef deployment, you need to have a workstation set up, and this workstation will communicate to the chef server. So you cannot directly deploy your code to the chef server. Instead, you have to set up a workstation, and from there you can basically whatever code you have written for your servers, you can deploy it to the chef server, and from the chef server finally the clients will get all the configuration. So workstation has why these two components are separated, chef server and workstation. Basically you can put the chef server and workstation on the same server, but having a workstation on the different servers provides you a restriction on what basically who can access the chef or who can modify the chef code, and where he can deploy the chef code. So this workstation, while setting up this workstation, you configure this workstation to basically listen or basically talk to this particular chef server. So that whatever code you write it, you go at the end you can deploy it on this particular chef server. So all these things would, once all these things would be set up like chef server and chef workstation, then you can start writing your chef code. So let's say we have we are in the workstation currently. We'll log into workstation. Before that, I will bring up the servers. It will take a few minutes. So since it's a test setup, so we have set up few virtual machines on the same server, and then on these virtual machines we have set up different components like chef server, chef workstation, and one chef client. So there, so once we will write our code, we will write our code on the workstation. We will deploy it to the chef server, and then once that is deployed, we will see how it is got deployed or pushed to the chef client, or how the chef client will get all the configurations from the chef server. So Vagrant is a very good tool. Using Vagrant and VirtualBox, you can create small VMs on your laptops or desktop or whatever you are using and you can launch these virtual machines. You can set up whatever whatever tools you want to learn or you want to test it out, and that way you can, once you have confidence here, you can go and actually do it on other systems, or even you can have you can have clear knowledge about how these tools or software works. So let's say if the server is off, chef server. Okay, so chef server is is up, so we can log in, and similarly we'll see our workstation is up, so we'll try to log in. Okay, so by the time the system comes up, we'll talk about what is a chef cookbook, and how is basically cookbook is written, and what is the purpose of writing a cookbook. So in chef, basically in order to manage all of your code, you have to write it, or keep the files in particular directory structure. So Chef already provides you a way to easily manage all of your Chef codes. So in order to do that, you first create a Chef repo. So Chef repo is basically a repository of all of your cookbooks. So this will contain all of your uh, cookbooks that you need to configure on your remote servers. So these cookbooks would be again again they will contain recipes. So cookbooks again are a set of recipes. So recipes is basically in chef, recipes means what you want to how you want to basically have your system to be configured. So in any of the configuration management tools, your main what you tell them is basically the final state of the config of the system. So you basically tell them what would be the state of a particular resource. So let's say if the resource is user, so resource user, what would be the final state? You just mention the final state, and the chef would take care of it. So you don't need to basically define, or you have to say the chef that how the chef would do it. So you only say, you only tell the chef that what you want at the end server, and the chef will do it for you. So in recipes, basically you write the end state or the final state of the resources, and in a recipe you work with resources. So resources are basically anything that you work or that you configure through chef. So resources, there are actually already predefined resources. So in chef and any other configuration management tool, the resources are predefined, like say file is a resource, service is a resource, package is a resource, user is a resource. So we basically in recipes, we work with the resources and then we define the final state of that resource. So, so that's how you manage, or the chef manages your code. So it is, you have to have a repository for all of your cookbooks, and each cookbook will have it will have its own set of recipes. So now I will show you how to write, how to basically set up this chef repo, and then we will see how we can write a cookbook or configure or create a cookbook inside a chef repo, and then finally how to deploy it on the, or how our client or the remote server which we want to configure will be fetching all this information from the chef server. So let's say we are now on the workstation. So workstation is where we will deploy, where we will write all of our codes. So in the workstation, we will first need to create a chef repo. So that in order to create the chef repo, you need to first install in the workstation is basically it's the software that is installed is Chef DK. So Chef DK is a chef development kit. So once you install Chef DK, you will have all the tools required for creating and managing the chef code. So on this server, I have installed Chef DK, and now once the Chef DK is installed, you will have all the tools available for writing and managing your chef code. So the first step for writing chef code is to create a repo, chef repo. So the command to do it is chef generate repo and then repo name. So this repo name can be anything, whatever you wish, you can name it. So let's say if we create a repo called test. So let's see, we'll run this and we'll see what it does. So you will see that it will execute, and it will create a directory structure called test in the same directory where you have executed the command. So if you do ls-l, you'll see a directory called test would be created in the same directory where you have executed this command. Now this directory, if you change to this directory and again check, so there would be many other directories and files would be configured. So this structure is already defined by the chef, and it would be already, this is kind of framework, so that would be created by the chef itself. So when you will run chef generate cookbook, chef generate repo and the repo name, so it will create a directory and it will create all the required directories inside the repo directory. So our repo is test, so you'll see it has created it has created multiple directories and files in this repository. So what are these different repositories? So different directories. So these different directories are meant for managing the different components of a chef repo. So in chef repo, one component is cookbooks. So as I told you, it's a collection of cookbooks. So these cookbooks will be holding all the cookbooks you would be writing. So currently we see in this cookbooks there is just a example cookbook already created. And if you want to create your own cookbook, then you will when you will create a cookbook, it has to be created inside this cookbooks directory. Similarly, in the other directories like data bags, and environments and roles. So they are also uh, they will be also managing different components of a chef repo. So in chef repo you have cookbooks, data bags. Data bags are basically where you will be storing all of your global variables. Let's say your user is a global variable because you need some user to be present on all the servers. So let's say you configure all the users here, and then you can use this global users or the global variables for a particular user inside your chef recipe, and then you can use it anywhere. So databases are like whatever you want to access it globally across your recipes. You can define all the variables inside the database. Similarly, environments. So environments are defined mostly to segregate your servers. So in a typical setup in any of the applications, you will have development, staging, pre-prod, prod. So there could be many multiple environments. So in order to manage multiple environments, you need to identify which server should get or should be configured for which environment. So that you can do through this environments component. And the next is the roles. So roles is again, it is a way of identifying a server. So let's say you have different kinds of server like a database server, web server, middleware server. So how will you identify, or you can make sure that this server would be only configured for, or when you run a chef client, that server should only get the configuration for a database or a web server or a middleware. So basically roles you defined to basically identify each server, or basically assign each server uh, with its required configurations. So the roles will be configured for this purpose. So now all these things would be created by default. Now we would start working with this chef repo. So once this chef repo is created, one thing you need to do is basically you need to configure it to make it work, or to integrate with your chef chef server. So in order to do that, you need to create a file called knife.yml. So that file I have already created for my previous repo. So I'll show you how it is created. So here you need to create a directory called .chef. So if you see a directory called .chef is there, and if you go to this directory, you will see a file called knife.rb. So this file is required to basically configure your workstation with your chef server, and along with this you need some certificates, okay, SSL certificates. Those are basically created when you are setting up the chef server. So you need to copy them as well in order to authenticate this workstation to talk to that chef server. So once all this setup is done, then basically you can start writing your cookbooks. So this is only required when you want your cookbooks to be deployed to the chef server. But let's say if you just want to uh, write the cookbooks and test it out, so for that you don't need a chef server. You can write the cookbooks, and then using the chef solo uh, you can configure, or you can deploy the configurations on the same server where you are creating these cookbooks. So now what we'll do, let's say we want to create a cookbook. So so all the cookbooks, whatever we're creating under cookbooks directory. But Chef DK provides a way, provides a tools to to create your cookbooks uses from the command line. So there is one way where you can create it manually also by creating files inside cookbooks and then editing and writing the files by yourself. And the recommended way is to do it using using the tools provided by the Chef DK. So one of the tools, so the important tool that you will have to use every time is the knife. So for every chef cookbook related for a for every cookbook execution or creation or any of these code creation inside this chef repo, you will have to use knife. So this is the command to create a cookbook. So let's say we create a cookbook called Taste. So this cookbook we are creating inside chef repo. You need to make sure that this command you need to run in the chef repo directory, not inside the cookbooks. So once you will see that this command will basically create a directory in the cookbooks called Taste. Okay, so this command will create a cookbook for your chef repo and will set up the and create, and in additionally it will create all the required files for that particular cookbook. So if you again go to check this Taste directory, you can see that there are again lot of directories and files would be created automatically. So these are the again different components of the cookbooks. So you need to configure if your recipe or whatever the task you want to perform through chef. So you may have to use all of these components, or you may have to use one or two components, or you might not have to use any of the you might not have to use the entire components. So it depends what you want to achieve through your cookbooks and recipe. So so accordingly you will use these components. But the main thing in this cookbook is this recipes directory. So this is the main place where you will be writing all of your recipes or with recipes for this particular cookbook. So cookbook is again a collection of recipes. So we will have to manage all of our recipes inside this recipes directory. So recipes, if you see, there is already a file called default.rb. So default.rb would be present by default, or it's a default file. So whenever you will be using or adding this cookbook to any of your nodes, so what will happen if you add this cookbooks and you want to run this recipe, so it will always read from this file default.rb. So default.rb is the file that will be read whenever you will be applying the default recipe for this cookbook. So now let's go to this recipe directory, because the main purpose of creating a cookbook is to write a recipe and then use these recipes to configure our system. So now let's say we'll go to this recipes directory and we'll see what is there in the default.rb currently. So you'll see that currently there is nothing inside this file. So these all are lines are basically commit. So basically there is nothing configured by default. Okay. So in order to now, in order to write your recipe, you have to edit this file default.rb. So in the default.rb, you have to write your recipes. So as I told earlier, recipes are basically are the collection of resources and their final state. Okay. So let's say we want to create a user called test, and we want to create this user test, and that this user should be assigned to say uh, admin group, and we can also define like what is its shell, default shell. So whenever you create a Linux user, whatever things you provide while creating a user, so same things you can define it here, and then you will tell chef that create a user, or basically that there should be a user with all these attributes on the remote server. So let's do this thing. Let's create a user, and then we will see how it gets it gets created on the remote server. So let's say we have a user. We'll create a user called test. So here the resource is user. So user is the name of the resource. So as I told you, the resource, there are different kind of resources which you can find. So few of the resources, common resources are like file, service, package, and user is also one of the resource. So each resource has its set of attributes. So to configure these attributes, you have to first mention what is the resource, and then define the resource and define the attributes associated with this particular resource. So now we'll create a user called test, and let's see how it's got deployed on the remote server. So in Chef, whatever code you write, it's mostly in Ruby format, or it follows its own DSL. So DSL is basically domain specific language. So why we call it domain specific language? Because this is specific to this domain only. As in this particular syntax, you can only write it, or you can only use it for the writing chef cookbooks or chef code. You cannot use it for any other purpose. But so that's why chef uses its own language, that is its own DSL, and along with that it uses also the Ruby code. Since chef is written in Ruby, so it also uses the Ruby code to configure or to write your codes. So let's say how. So it basically follows the Ruby format. let's say this is the user resource, and now I'll describe what is this, what does this code mean. So here what we are defining is basically user. So user is a resource and we are giving it a name, that is user test. And then so in Ruby what you do is, this is the Ruby code basically, do and end. So this entire code is in the format of Ruby code. But if you see the other part of it, like manage home equal to true, comment, so these are the attributes of this test user. Okay, so it's combination of Ruby code and Chef DSL. So here manage home is an attribute for the test resource and its value is true. Similarly, comment is an attribute whose value is user test. UID is basically a unique ID. So whenever you create a user on the remote system, it is associated with a unique ID. Similarly, group ID is also associated. And when a user is created, you define its home directory. What would be the user's home directory? And shell is his login shell. So whenever the user will log in, what would be the shell he would be using. So now once this is done, what we have to do is basically we have to save this file. And then finally, once this file is saved, you need to deploy or upload this cookbook to your Chef server. So in order to do this, you have to use the same knife command, but instead of create, we will do upload. So what we are doing here is basically whatever the code we have written, we are uploading it to the server so that our clients, or basically the nodes that we want to configure, those can connect to the Chef server and can finally configure themselves or get the configurations from the Chef servers and apply on the nodes. So now this is done. So now we know that now the code is on the Chef server, but how our node would know that it needs to configure this particular cookbook. So in order to do that, you basically have to again configure your node also. So what you basically do is you have to associate this recipe, cookbook recipe, with your node. So a node is nothing but a server that you want to manage through Chef. So if you run this command, knife node list. So what it gives, like whatever, it will give you the list of the nodes that you are currently managing through Chef. Okay, so we have currently only one server or only one node that we are managing through Chef, and this is the name of the server. This is the Chef client. Now what we want to associate this recipe with this node so that when we run the Chef client on the node, it will fetch this recipe or this configuration and apply there. So to do that, we have to use this command. So so here here we have to execute this particular command. So I will describe what this command does. So it basically what we are doing, knife node. So we are working with node, and what we are doing, run list add Chef client, and then this recipe. So run list is basically in any node, a run list is the list of the recipes that you want to configure your node with. So this would be basically a list of all the recipes that you want to configure, list of all the recipes that you want to apply on the remote or this particular node. So what we are doing, we are adding in the, this is the run list. So in the run list, we want to add uh, for the chef client, we want to add a recipe called taste. So what it will does, it will associate this recipe with this chef client's run list, so that when the chef client will run the chef client on it locally, it will fetch the configuration that we have done in the this test recipe. So if you see that now this chef client has two run list, so role web server and role and recipe test. Okay, so role is what I discussed earlier, right? So this is the way how you identify or you define what kind of server would that particular node would be. So here we are defining the role web server that is already assigned, but we are mainly concerned about this recipe. So recipe is test. So we have added to this nodes run chef clients run list, we have added the recipe called taste, so that when the chef client will fetch the configuration from the chef server, it will get this recipe and create this user called taste. So if you go to the chef client, the node which we are trying to configure, so if you if you check the test user is already there. So what we'll do, we will change it to something else so that we can know that that user is configured. So again, we'll go back and edit our recipe file, the default.rb file, and let's create user called alpha. Whenever you change anything in your recipe, you need to again upload to your chef server, because unless and until you don't upload it to test server, it won't be available to your clients or the nodes. So we will again upload this cookbook. But this step is not required again, since we have already associated our recipe to the run list of this node. So that will always be there. So we don't need to again run this. Once we have associated a recipe, it will be always associated, and whenever you make changes, it will be able to fetch the new changes. So now if we go and see here, there is a user called alpha. So there is no user called alpha. Now we'll see after after we run this chef client, what it does. So we have already configured the user and we have uploaded to the to our chef server and associate this recipe to our node chef client. Now once all this is done, you have to go to the server which you want to configure, and you need to run the command on your server that is called chef client. Okay, I think there is some error with the previous role, so just a minute. So we will just remove the earlier role that was associated that is web server, because there is some issue with that code. So now let's what you have to do, we'll have to edit the node and then just remove that particular association with that. Okay, so yeah, so in order to edit anything using the knife command, you'll have to set a editor value. So editor value is basically what editor you want to use. You can select your you can select any of the editor of your choice. That can be like Nano, VI. So I am selecting say VI because VI is available on all the Linux systems. So I'll just do export and then so that it will use VI to uh, do the edit for all of the edit work. We can use this editor, VI editor. Oh, looks like it went down. Oh, my battery was very less. That's why it stopped all this. Okay, so we were editing the node. So we have to again export it because it was rebooted. So our environment variable would have been unset. Okay, so if you see, this is our node configuration. So this is in the JSON format. Now you can see the configuration of this node, that there is a run list. So run list is basically it defines what all would be associated, or what all configurations that are associated with this particular node. So one is role and one is recipe. So we'll just remove this role for now, and we'll just let the recipe test be there. We'll save it. So now this edit is being done on the server directly. So we don't need to again do anything to the server side. So we just have to edit it, and then it will update all the configurations for that particular node. Now let's again try to run our chef client. Okay, so here it says that group 1234 does not exist. So since the group is not there, so that's why it's throwing an error. So let's say we add it to some existing groups. So let's say there's an admin group. Let's go and add it to that group. So again, we'll edit our cookbooks, and then taste, recipes, default. Let's say GID, we change it to admin. So since it's not there, that's why it's throwing an error. So we'll again upload our cookbook since we have changed our cookbook. So knife, cookbook, upload, test. Now this is done. So again we'll try it. Okay, now you'll see it executed successfully this time. And here if you check the output, it will tell you that what is the cookbook it is executing, cookbook or version, and then what recipe it's executing. So recipe is test default. So here since we didn't mention any recipe name, so that's why it will, from the cookbook test, it will just take the default recipe. So default.rb is the default recipe, and then it will executed this recipe, default recipe, and then the user was created. So now if you see ID alpha, now you'll see that the user is created. So this execution, the whatever configurations we were trying to do, now it is configured on our remote server. So this is how basically you write a cookbook, and then finally you deploy on your server.